So in a previous seminar on my discussion about my psilocybin experience, I made this point that I am not my body. And so today's seminar is going to be about the fact that I am not my body and you are not yours. So a few things I'm going to do in this talk. First, what the media and the world want us to believe and why that's detrimental. The second is why they're wrong and why it is actually a fact about the universe that I've proven through logic and the laws of physics that I am not my body and you are not yours. The third thing I'm going to do is talk about what are some of the interesting implications that follow from that philosophically and how that might affect how you see yourself and how you live in the world. And then fourth, how can we reprogram our minds to actually live the truth that I am not my body and you are not yours. So first of all, one way that this seminar is different from any other sort of pop psychology book or video that you have taken in before is that while this does have interesting philosophical implications, it's derived from a logical proof regarding the laws of physics and how that implies the fact that conscious identity is not contained within the brain, the skull, or the body as a whole. So first of all, what the world and the media tell us and often want us to believe is that we are our bodies. Our bodies are our identity. They're the same thing. It's not true, which I'm going to talk about later in this video, but here are some problematic results of that. The first is this obsession with how we look physically, our weight, right? Constantly trying to lose weight so that we can look better. Aging, for example, anti-aging creams and surgeries and medications and whatever designed to make you look younger or to avoid aging somehow. Just this obsession with appearance extends also beyond the body. The idea that the things that we own are somehow a representation of our identities, because if our bodies are us, then that's physical. Then, of course, everything we own is a reflection of our identity. And that obsession with our weight and our skin complexion and our aging and all these different aspects of our physical body, I think, are very problematic. Second of all is YOLO, you only live once, which for a while sounded like a good philosophy, but is actually quite toxic, right? Because it causes people to feel an anxiety that they constantly have to do something new or interesting or noteworthy or post-worthy. Otherwise, they're just wasting their time. So there's this constant anxiety that we're running out of time. It causes midlife crises, existential crises. The idea that my entire identity, my conscious identity, is tied directly to this body has caused me lots of anxiety in the past, and the same idea probably has caused you a lot of anxiety in the past. The third detrimental result is there is this constant comparison with other people. I mean, we compare ourselves in every possible way to other people, physically, abilities, mental capabilities, sports, our sizes, our everything about our bodies and what they're capable of can be and is compared against other people. And I'll talk a little about comparison later. If we're just comparing two things because it's interesting, that's one thing. But if you're making a value judgment based on that comparison, that one is better than the other, for example, then that becomes really problematic because we're always finding ourselves measuring shorter than other people. There's always somebody who's more attractive, who's thinner, who's richer, who's smarter, who's whatever, fill in the blank. And so these constant comparisons, I feel, are actually quite toxic to our self-esteem and our emotional and mental health. On that note, this idea of constantly comparing and the anxiety it causes, well, that also results in feelings of unworthiness and the idea that we're not good enough, and that often drives addiction because people want to self-medicate these awful feelings that they are not adequate, they're not enough, they're not sufficient in one way or another, and that is because they believe that their identity, they may believe it directly or indirectly, but they believe that their identity is tied directly to and is their physical body. A fourth problematic result is that it results in an excessive focus on extending life for as long as possible. I feel like, not that life isn't valuable, of course it's valuable, but the idea of extending somebody's life when they're very, very old and in pain, or even a young person who is in a lot of pain, the idea that we just have to push for a longer life, that somehow that provides more utility in the world, that is better in some way, I think is false. And if you think that the person is that body, then it might seem rational to say, well, we want that person to continue to exist for longer, so let's try to extend the life indefinitely. But if you realize that those actually are not the same thing, the body and the conscious identity are not the same thing, then maybe you realize that it's not always worth it to extend life indefinitely. Of course, the fifth problem that results from these previous four, from this obsession with how we look, the anxiety of aging, this constant comparison with each other, results in huge profits for enormous industries. So there is obviously an enormous amount of pressure from the economic world to continue the belief that you are your body, so you better fix it up and make it look really nice, and you better extend its life as long as possible. And when you don't feel adequate to other people because you've been comparing yourself, that, well, there's an enormous liquor market that's available for you to self-medicate and so forth. So there are enormous profits from this. Now, is that itself a detriment? No. I guess my point is simply that there is strong institutional resistance to the idea that you are not your body. But then a fifth, I think, problem, or another problem I think that results from these other four, is that people who believe that they are their body are more easily controlled. And of course, there are lots of other detriments, which is the reason that the self-help market is so enormous and the antidepressant medication market is so enormous, because people feel like crap, and this is largely the result of the belief that they are their bodies. You are not your body. So I'm going to move on to the second part of the seminar right now, which is talking about the idea that this philosophical concept has appeared in pop psychology for a very long time. You may have lots of books in your bookcase that talk about, you are something more than your body. Maybe they have good messages. What I want to point out is that this is not just pop psychology. I've actually proven that I am not my body, and by extension, you are not your body. And this has been actually proven twice, as far as I know, ever. Once by me and another by another researcher, and I'll have links to that video. I had a discussion about that proof. And if you've already seen the video, feel free to skip on to the next section in the seminar. But I just wanted to mention this. What I have proven is that a particular conscious state cannot exist in more than one point in space-time. I proved this using only special relativity in physics and logic in a previous video. And you don't even need special relativity. You can actually just start with locality, which is another feature of physics. And I proved this. This is a physics result. This is not pop psychology. I proved that a particular conscious state cannot exist in more than one place in space-time. Now, what the heck does that mean? It means a lot of things, and there are a lot of implications of that. But one of the biggest implications of that, and this is the key, is that it means that consciousness is non-local. Now, again, this may sound very abstruse. Let me explain what this means. Locality in physics has to do with enclosing something in a volume. So information in a volume would be local to itself. To say that consciousness is non-local means that there is no volume, no enclosed volume in the universe that by itself produces a conscious state. That's key. The fact that consciousness is non-local means that there's no volume in the universe, including the volume around my brain or even the volume around my body, that by itself produces a conscious state, including the conscious state I'm experiencing right now. That's fundamental. Very, very few scientists, and especially physicists, even know this argument and probably wouldn't have an opinion on it without learning about it. But consciousness is non-local. What that means is that what is producing my conscious state right now, and I am conscious, cannot be contained by the information inside this volume that encloses my skull and my brain. It is not produced by the volume that encloses my entire body. It is not produced entirely by the volume that encompasses the planet Earth. That is a physical fact. Consciousness is non-local. Now, quantum mechanics is inherently non-local, so there is good reason to think, and Nobel laureate Roger Penrose does seem to think that there is a quantum mechanical component to consciousness. I think that's right, but that's not what I've proven, and we don't need to prove that. The mere fact that consciousness is non-local is enough to show that my conscious identity, what I'm experiencing right now, is not the product entirely of anything inside this body or inside this brain. Isn't that amazing? Now, in another video, a colleague, Dr. Stoika, proved this result in an entirely different way, also invoking special relativity and how fast information can transfer, but proved it in a different way. And I discussed that in another video that I will link here. So this is a fact about the universe, and the implications of that are that, among other things, what I perceive as this conscious identity, is not the same thing as this body, because other stuff is necessary to produce this conscious identity. That's phenomenal. Now, what are the implications of this? So I have several videos on consciousness, on the brain. I have a recent video on my personal experience with psilocybin mushrooms, in which I pointed out that a belief that I had internalized was that I am not this body. But there's other really interesting points and facts that follow from that statement, and I'll talk about them. First, does this imply that there's an afterlife? Well, no. I have a previous video on the scientific evidence for and against an afterlife that I'll link here. This does not prove or imply by itself that consciousness continues after physical death. However, it's certainly circumstantial evidence that that's the case. If what produces your conscious identity is not just your body or just your brain, in fact, it may not be those things at all, although certainly they affect your conscious identity and what you experience. If what produces your conscious identity is not your body and not your brain, then that's at least circumstantial evidence that your conscious identity exists and will continue to exist independently of what happens to the particular body you reside in. But in any event, I just want to point out that I'm not here discussing an afterlife. But what I do want to talk about is what are the implications of the idea of the fact that I am not my body and you are not yours. Okay, let's talk about you. One of the implications is that you inhabit a particular body. Now, some things about that body are you experience the world through the five senses of that body: seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, and tactile feeling. There's probably a sixth, maybe not, we won't call it a sixth sense, but your brain by itself can provide sensation. And if you've ever been in a sensory deprivation tank where you feel nothing at all from those five senses, you can have lots of interesting thoughts, and that certainly is coming from somewhere. So your brain can produce ideas and images and thoughts and sensations and experiences on top of that. But nevertheless, those are things, those are sensations that come from your body. So you experience the world through the body that you inhabit. And the second thing is, unless you debate whether or not you have free will, I won't go there. I think we have free will. Besides experiencing the world through the five senses of the body that you inhabit, you also can control your body to some very limited extent. You can exercise free will, but keep in mind and remember that it's a very limited extent to which you can actually affect the rest of the world. Sure, you have free will, but it's still very limited. What do these imply? The first thing I think it implies, I notice there's a separation between you and body. The first thing is that body is made of earth. It's just made of materials that ultimately came from the ground. It's of the earth, from the earth. It will return to the earth. It will be dirt at some point. The body that you inhabit is in fact decaying, but it doesn't mean that you are decaying. I see my body getting older, aging, but I am experiencing more things about the world and I'm becoming wiser. My conscious identity is not decaying. My body is. Your body is decaying, but you aren't. The second thing that's key is that you did not choose your body. You inhabit a body that was born in a particular place in the world, in a particular socioeconomic status, with a particular set of DNA. The DNA itself will pre-program in many ways how that body will turn out, how it will affect your behavior. All these features about the particular body that you inhabit, you had no choice over. You didn't choose that body. And so already you might see where I'm going with this. If you didn't choose your body that already existed in a particular place in the world, that was born in a particular place with a set of DNA that has its own propensities, if you didn't choose it, then you should realize that it is irrational to have any shame or embarrassment about that body that you inhabit. These things that we obsess over about our body, things that we want to change that aren't quite right, we're too heavy, we're too short, we have blemishes in various places, whatever it is that you may not like about your body, remind yourself that it is the particular body that you inhabit about which you had no choice. Therefore, there is absolutely no need, or is it rational to feel shame or embarrassment about any aspect of your body? Second, we often blame ourselves for the inadequacies of the bodies that we inhabit. But when we do that, it's just irrational. I mean, just some things that I wrote down are, you have a genetic predisposition to obesity. You come from a long line of ancestors who were obese. It is really, really, really hard, if that is you, to shed those pounds. And maybe you do it once, but then you quickly bounce back up and you're constantly kicking yourself about you're not good enough because you're fat or everyone else is thinner, and why can't you just whatever, stay on a diet, lose weight, exercise. And you're blaming yourself for a genetic predisposition to that. Addiction, for example. People are genetically predisposed to addiction. Now, what I'm not going to claim is that we have no accountability or responsibility for our actions. Well, of course we do, to the extent that we have that limited free will. But be kind to yourself if you're an addict, if you realize that you already have a genetic predisposition to that addiction. It means it's harder for you to not be addicted than other people. So recognize that and stop blaming yourself for these genetic predispositions. Don't blame yourself for where you grew up. If you're born in the third world and don't have access to good education, why are you going to compare yourself to somebody like me who had the privilege of living in a place where I was well fed and I had a roof over my head and I had opportunities to then go on to college and graduate school, etc. So don't blame yourself for the fact that you just randomly appeared in a body in a place that just didn't have the same opportunities. Other things, your sexual identity, your sexual orientation, your particular fetishes, anything that is something that comes from your genes, as long as you aren't harming yourself or anyone else directly or indirectly, it's okay. It's not something that you should feel ashamed of or blame yourself for. Mental and emotional challenges. For example, I have ADHD. I have my entire life, although I've only been treated for the last decade or so. And it has had a profoundly negative, at times, effect on my life, bouncing from job to job to job. I've had 30, 40 different jobs and a handful of careers in my life. At the same time, I also recognize some of the amazing advantages I had by having ADHD, by constantly constantly shifting my attention. It meant I very quickly quit things that weren't valuable or interesting, and I would move on to something else. And that has brought me lots of interesting experiences in life and lots of success. But for example, you may, if you have, for example, I said autism or anxiety or depression disorders. These are genetic predispositions, and there's just no sense. It's completely irrational to blame yourself for them. The next thing I want to talk about, comparison, irrational. To compare yourself to others. Now, by comparison, I want to talk about this very quickly. There's comparison with value judgment and without value judgment. So if you find it interesting that for example, I have different DNA than this one right here, and I can compare us and realize it's, in a lot of ways we're very similar. We're both mammals, we both connect emotionally, she loves me, I love her, but we're also very different in lots of very obvious ways. So that sort of comparison is interesting and useful and certainly not harmful. The kind of comparison that I'm worried about is the value judgment, saying, well, I'm better than her because I'm a human. I don't know what that means, but when you compare yourself, I'm worse than somebody else because they're taller, or I find them more attractive than I am, or whatever. That kind of comparison is really problematic. The second is when we compare our bodies as a reflection of ourselves. So, like I said, let's say I feel like I'm not as attractive as another man. If I've compared the bodies in a value judgment kind of way, but then if I let that reflect on myself, like there's something inadequate about me, my conscious identity, because I'm not as attractive, that is really, really problematic. And then we start to blur the lines, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. We start to blur the lines between our independent conscious identity and how that is interrelated to our bodies, the bodies that we inhabit. So on that note, it is irrational for us to compare ourselves to other people who just happen to inhabit luckier bodies with DNA that's more attractive or smarter, or in a place where they had more opportunities, or whatever it happens to be the case. It is just irrational to compare ourselves in a value judgment sort of way against other people based on these random locations of conscious identities. You did not have control over the choice of your body. Your body is not you. And then the next thing I'm going to talk about is appreciation. And by appreciation, I don't necessarily mean thanks. I just mean a recognition that you aren't your body. And so just as it is perfectly acceptable to get angry or upset at your body because of your DNA or your genes or the situation you happen to be in because of your birth, it is also acceptable and I think good to have an appreciation for the things that your body allows you to do and to experience. For example, I can walk, and that's an amazing thing that I appreciate. I can travel around the world and walk through amazing cities and get those experiences, and that is in part due to the fact that I can walk. So, or rather the body that I inhabit is able to walk. So when I realize that I am not my body, then it not only allows me to blame that body instead of blaming myself for those things for which I'm not responsible, but it also allows me a new appreciation for the ways in which my body allows me to interact with and experience the world through these five senses. And I realize that it's a very wondrous world to be able to experience everything through these five senses. All right, so body and identity relationship. You are not your body, but you clearly have a strong relationship with your body, right? You experience the world through the sensations from your body, and you control, to a limited extent, the way that your body interacts with the world. So since that's been happening since your birth, I'm 46 now, I have experienced the world through these senses and manipulated the world through my free will in this body for 4 or more decades, and it makes it very easy for me to think that I am my body, but I'm not. However, I clearly have a very close relationship to it, and much of what creates my personal identity is strongly affected by the capabilities that I have, the sensations I have experienced, the ways that I've interacted with the world, the experiences I've had in the world. All of these have helped to shape my identity. So I just want to point out, I think it's an interesting question that you can ask yourself, how much your personal identity has been formed by your DNA and the body that you inhabit. Another implication of the fact that you are not your body and the fact that consciousness is non-local, I think is just very interesting, is that you are connected to everything in the universe. And when I say you, I'm talking about your conscious identity, not your body. You are connected to everything in the universe. And that is because there is no local volume in the entire universe that can wrap around or contain whatever it is that creates your conscious identity. That means that your consciousness, your conscious identity is literally connected to everything in the universe. I just think it's an amazing thought. I don't really know what the implications of that are, but I just think it's amazing. The final thing I want to talk about is reprogramming our minds. It's so easy to believe and to feel that this is my body and I am my body, and to live like that and to experience the detriments that come with that. So I've been thinking a lot about, well, how do I reprogram my mind so that I can actually recognize on a regular basis and reap the benefits of the belief and the fact that I am not my body and you are not your body. And here are just some suggestions, some ideas that I have, and feel free in the comments to mention other ones that you might think of, and also feel free to mention other implications you think are interesting from the fact that you are not your body. So how do we program our minds? One is changing our language and our lexicon. And this is really hard to do because when I tell my wife that she's beautiful, and she is beautiful, do I mean the body that she inhabits is sexually attractive to me? Do I mean that the body that she possesses is worth painting on canvas? Do I mean that the soul, the conscious identity behind her eyes is a beautiful person? It's very easy to confuse those things. And so I have been trying more and more to refer to this body, or even sometimes my body, in place of myself. When I'm talking about this body, then that's what I refer to instead of talking about myself. Another example is sometimes I will say to friends, I will refer to the body that you inhabit instead of you, if I'm referring to the body instead of the person. It's really weird and hard to break them up, but our lexicon, our language has so trained us that the body and the soul are the same thing. Because what does the word you mean? Y-O-U. Does it mean the body you inhabit or your conscious identity? There isn't really a distinction. So I've been trying to adjust my own language to reflect the distinction. And I'm not claiming that any of these are easy. It's really hard to deprogram or reprogram ourselves. One of those is looking at the mirror. When I'm looking in the mirror with clothes on or without clothes on, it's very easy to, see things that, maybe I need to lose a little weight, or maybe this needs to change, or it's very easy to see perceived defects as the result of comparisons against other people induced by the media. It's very easy for me to look at my face, the face that I inhabit in the mirror, and think, that's me, I'm aging. I mean, I don't always have that feeling, but I often do. And it's very easy to look in the mirror and to think negative thoughts about myself because of the body that I inhabit. So what I'm instead doing much more often is when I look in the mirror, I will conscientiously look in my eyes, or rather look into these eyes, and look behind them and remind myself that there is a conscious identity, a soul behind those eyes that isn't those eyes, that isn't those ears, that isn't these fingers, that there is something else, a conscious identity. And I can look at that person in the mirror when I look in those eyes, but again, I have to remind myself that those eyes aren't me, that there's something behind those eyes that is the actual conscious identity. And when I say behind, I don't mean physically located. That's another confusing aspect, is it's very easy to look in the mirror and to think, to see me, because, I can control these hands, so that must be me, and I can see through these eyes and smell with this nose, that must be me. But I've already shown you, I've already proven logically and through physics that conscious identity is non-local and therefore cannot be entirely created by what's inside this body. So when I look in the mirror now, I conscientiously remind myself that there is something bigger and greater that just happens to see behind these eyes, that just happens to inhabit this body for the purpose of those five senses, that happens to experience the world through this body, that isn't the same as the body. And when I remind myself of that, I just feel so much better about who I am, because who I am is basically the experiences that I have, largely through my experiences, my sensations through this body, and the limited free will that I have to make choices that I think are consistent with my values and my morals. It's very limited. And when I look at that person, I feel much better and more directed about what matters in the universe. Getting really philosophical here. Next, comparing ourselves to others. And I discussed this before. This is key, and it's ingrained in the fabric of a capitalist society. It's everywhere. It seems almost impossible, even if you shut down Facebook and don't watch Netflix, if you don't read the news, it seems almost impossible to stop comparing ourselves against other people, especially our bodies. But you have to start somewhere. And at least by recognizing the times that you compare yourself positively or negatively to other people, you can recognize it, and you can also ask yourself, am I comparing our bodies, things about which our DNA almost completely determines? Am I comparing our behaviors, right? Because I have some free will that can allow me to make decisions and to have certain behaviors within the extent of the pressures of my genetic predispositions. So maybe comparing behaviors might be valuable and useful, especially if you want to be more consistent with your personal set of values. But once we realize that we're comparing our bodies to other people and almost always finding them lacking, just realizing it and correcting at that time can be helpful. Next, I write, get in touch with your soul or your identity. And what I mean by this is there are several ways to do it. One would be with psychedelics in a safe set and setting, as I discussed in a previous video. Psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, LSD, again in a therapeutic, safe set and setting that can help you to get in touch with your soul. Another way might be just turn off your senses, or at least your five senses. I spent a little time in a sensory deprivation tank, which is filled with Epsom salt, so you float on it and it's completely dark and there's no sound, you're wearing earplugs, and it's a fascinating experience, because even when you feel nothing from your five senses, you can and do still have lots of interesting thoughts. You become much more aware of the soul of your identity, of the things that are happening behind the sensations from your body. Another way would be to spend some time meditating every day. And what I mean by that, I was always afraid of that word because it just seemed awful. But what I really mean by that is just kind of just sitting in one place, a nice place, maybe outside looking at nature, just on your patio or something on a nice day, and just kind of spacing out, just kind of staring and not doing anything, just observing and just feeling the sensations from your body. What are you feeling? Oh, I have a slight stomach ache because I forgot to eat breakfast. Oh, I feel the cool breeze on my skin. And just becoming aware of what you experience through your five senses helps you to separate them, to realize that there is a thing, your soul, that's experiencing the world through those five senses, that you are not those five senses, that they're separate things. Next is, just like all of these, this is much easier said than done, but it's a start. And that is when there are things that you don't like about yourself, that make you feel bad about yourself, that maybe you're self-medicating for, either with alcohol, or even if you're just medicating with antidepressants or other drugs or whatever it happens to be, and if they happen to be the result of how you feel about yourself because of your body, this is an opportunity for you to just get angry at your body or your DNA. If you you are an alcoholic and that is a genetic predisposition, it probably is, get angry at that damn DNA that is causing this propensity for your addiction and forgive yourself. Again, easier said than done, but try to separate out your identity from your body. Now, having said that, you of course still have responsibility and accountability for your decisions and your actions via your free will. This is not a free-for-all, a get out of jail free card, but rather a recognition that the vast majority of ways that we kick ourselves and berate ourselves, the vast majority of those ways are not our fault. They say nothing about our character or who we are as conscious souls, but rather they say much more about the random bodies that we just happen to inhabit. So, as much as you can, get angry at your body instead of yourself and forgive yourself. But then on the other hand, appreciate your body. Appreciate the ways in which your body allows you to experience the world. You weren't guaranteed to have eyesight. There are lots of people who may be listening to this video right now who may be blind. They don't have eyesight. So you weren't guaranteed. You okay, puppy? Okay, baby, we're almost done, almost done. You weren't guaranteed to have eyesight, but if you do have eyesight, isn't it amazing that you can look around and experience the world and see the colors and see the three-dimensional shapes and the perspectives and experience the world with those eyes? I have these little things in my eyes, I forget what they're called, but as you get older, parts of the retina kind of start to come off and they create these little spots in your field of view. And I have spent a lot of the last decade just being annoyed at that and like, why can't I just have, clear vision? My perspective has completely changed. I wasn't guaranteed these eyes at all. The fact that I can experience the world, and sometimes I have to wear glasses, who cares? The fact that I can see the world and experience it through these eyes is just really an amazing thought. And I mean appreciate. You don't have to be thankful for things. I mean, yeah, there are benefits to writing out ways in which you're thankful, but I'm just saying appreciate, recognize the ways in which your body, which can be annoying at times and hold you back at times, also allows you to do lots of fascinating, interesting things in the world. So I guess I just want to conclude that there's certainly value in self-help books, in pop psychology, but what I have proven, I'm only one of two people, what I have proven is that my conscious identity, I am not my body, and for the same reason, you are not your body. Even though the world, the media, tell us something entirely different, and there are enormous profits to be made from people believing that they are their bodies. It causes untold anxiety. It causes people to obsess over how they look. It causes them to constantly compare themselves to other people and feel that it reflects on themselves. But you are not your body. I am not my body. And by starting to do some certain actions, we can begin to reprogram ourselves to actually feel and believe at a fundamental level that we are separate from our bodies. We're interrelated, of course, but we are separate from our bodies. And there's a lot of good that can come out of that. Thanks for listening.